The galactic Concordium was ancient. It had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth of countless civilizations, and the quiet extinction of those who could not adapt. It had studied and catalogued thousands of species, dissecting cultures, mapping languages, and distilling all sentient thought into a singular, universal lexicon. There were no unknown words in the Concordium. Except one. Night. The humans had joined the Concordium barely 2 centuries ago, yet their influence had already begun reshaping it. Their technology was crude but inventive, their biology unremarkable but endlessly adaptive. But their words, their concepts, those were another matter entirely. The word night had defied all translation. It was a simple sound easy for most species to pronounce. And yet, when run through the universal cognitive filter, it came back as anomalous data. For the Ketheri, a species of rigid honor codes, it translated as warrior of status. But that was incomplete. For the Zilnari, a species of traders and diplomats, it became noble protector. But that was wrong too. For the Urdrox, warlords of the void, it registered as holy soldier. But the humans denied that meaning as well. No matter how many linguistic models were applied, no matter how many algorithms were tested, the word remained singularly human. It was untranslatable. And that terrified the Concordium. The arrival of the Urdrox warbands. When the Urdrox warbands came for the Concordium, it was not unexpected. The Urdrox were a species that thrived on conquest. They were massive, their hulking exoskeletons covered in biometal plates, their mandibles sharpened for war. They viewed diplomacy as a delaying tactic, a means to weaken their enemy before the slaughter. For centuries, the Concordium had held them at bay with treaties, bribes, and the occasional display of overwhelming force. But now the Urdrox had grown bold. They had amassed a fleet the size of a small moon. Thousands of warships, each one bristling with enough firepower to shatter entire worlds. The Concordium pleaded for aid. The Ketheri sent negotiators. They were slaughtered. The Zilnari offered tribute. It was ignored. The Urdrox did not want words. They wanted dominion. And so, the Concordium sent out a final desperate request to their newest allies. To the humans. The human response. The Concordium had expected ships. They had expected fleets of war, a show of force to push back the Urdrox before open battle could begin. But when the human reinforcements arrived, they brought only one vessel. A single ship. And aboard it, one human. The Concordium panicked. "Where is your fleet?" the High Speaker of the Concordium demanded. "Where are your armies?" The human, a figure clad in a suit of shifting, liquid metal, simply smiled. "You called for help," he said. His voice was calm. "So I came." The Concordium delegates stared. "You?" one of the Ketheri scoffed. "What can one human do against an armada?" The human tilted his head as if considering the question. The metal of his armor rippled, almost alive. Then he spoke a single word. "Night." And the war began. The duel in the void. The Urdrox did not understand. To them, war was numbers. It was force. It was crushing the enemy under sheer, overwhelming might. But the Night did not fight like an army. He fought like a legend. The Urdrox warships moved to swarm him, their massive cannons locking onto his singular vessel. But he did not wait for them to fire. He left the ship entirely. His body shimmered, the liquid metal of his suit adapting to the vacuum of space. He moved without thrusters, without the need for oxygen or navigation. He became a spear of light, cutting through the blackness. The first Urdrox warship never had a chance. The Night landed upon its hull, and his armor shifted, tendrils of glowing metal burrowing into the warship's structure, corrupting it. The ship turned on its own fleet. The Urdrox screamed in confusion as their own vessels betrayed them, cannons firing wildly, energy shields failing as the Night's will spread like an infection. And then he moved again. From ship to ship, he carved a path through an entire armada, a single warrior tearing through thousands. The Urdrox had never seen a war like this, and for the first time in their history they knew fear. The last stand of the Urdrox War Master. At the heart of the fleet, aboard the dreadnought Blood Throne, War Master Kalvorik watched in horror. This was impossible. The human was one. The Urdrox were many. And yet their armada was dying. The War Master's mandibles clicked in rage. He would not accept this. He would end it himself. Kalvorik left his command throne, stepping onto the outer hull of his ship. He carried the Blade of the Void, a weapon forged from the dying core of a black hole, capable of cutting through reality itself. The human landed before him. The metal of the human's armor had changed. No longer liquid, it had solidified into something ancient, something primal. A visor of black glass covered his eyes, and upon his chest, a single golden emblem shimmered. Calvoric did not understand what he was looking at. But the human spoke, and his voice carried through the void itself. "This is how your war ends." The War Master roared. And the duel began. The untranslatable victory. The battle between knight and warlord lasted 17 seconds. 17 seconds in which time itself seemed to slow. The War Master's blade struck first, moving faster than light, reality bending around its edge. But the knight did not move to block it. He let it strike. And the blade shattered upon his armor. The War Master stumbled back, confused, disoriented. And then the knight struck once. A single blow. The War Master fell, his body turning to crystalline dust as the human's armor consumed him. The Urdrak's fleet crumbled. Their forces, leaderless, lost the will to fight. The survivors fled into the void, their conquest abandoned. The war was over. The meaning of night. When the knight returned to the Concordium, there was silence. He had saved them all. Not with an army. Not with a fleet. With something else. Something the Concordium could not define. The High Speaker looked at the human, eyes filled with something between reverence and terror. "What are you?" she whispered. The knight removed his visor. His eyes, human and yet not, shimmered with the same strange glow as his armor. "You wouldn't understand," he said softly. "There is no translation." The battlefield was silent. A silence deeper than mere absence of sound. A silence that carried the weight of annihilation. The Urdrak's fleet, once an armada vast enough to shroud entire solar systems in darkness, was broken. Their warships drifted, lifeless husks, their crews either dead or in frantic retreat. The Blood Throne, the mightiest dreadnought of the warbands, had become nothing more than an empty shell, its War Master gone, unmade by a force beyond understanding. And in the void, where the War Master had once stood, only the knight remained. His armor, still gleaming with its ever-shifting liquid radiance, pulsed with an eerie luminescence. The golden emblem upon his chest flickered, almost as if alive, absorbing the echoes of the battle. He turned. The surviving ships of the Concordium, those that had remained hidden on the edge of the system, waiting for a battle they had not expected to win, finally moved forward. A transmission crackled through the comms. "Knight," came the High Speaker's voice, laced with equal parts reverence and unease. "The battle is over. The Urdraks are gone." The human warrior tilted his head, gazing at the distant flagship where the Concordium leaders watched in astonishment. His expression was unreadable, but when he spoke, his voice was calm, as though he had never been in battle at all. "It is not over," he said, and the words carried with them a promise. The last warband. Far beyond the wreckage, where the light of the battle had not yet faded, a single Urdrak's warship still burned through the darkness. The Dagger of Vorax, the fastest warship in the War Master's fleet. Its captain, Kelthor, was not a warrior like Calvoric. He was a tactician, a survivor. And he knew, as surely as he knew the beat of his own twin hearts, that the Urdraks had never encountered anything like this human. Kelthor had watched from the safety of the Dagger's observation deck as the knight unmade his War Master. He had witnessed a lone human, clad in impossible armor, stand against an armada and win. And now the war was over. Kelthor bared his mandibles in a grimace. "No, not yet." With a swift motion he activated the ship's long-range comms. "Transmitting to all surviving Urdrak's fleets," he growled. "This is Captain Kelthor of the Dagger of Vorax. The War Master is dead. The fleet is shattered. The war is lost." Silence answered him. Then one by one signals flickered to life. From the depths of the void, Urdrak's commanders who had survived the battle responded. Some had escaped in time. Others had hidden their ships in nearby asteroid fields, waiting for the chance to strike again. Kelthor leaned forward, mandibles clicking as he chose his next words carefully. "The humans, they have a warrior," he said. "A single warrior. One who fought without fear. One who killed the War Master with but a single blow." A guttural voice responded, filled with disbelief. "One human?" Kelthor exhaled slowly. "Yes." Silence again. "Then, what do we do?" Kelthor narrowed his eyes. He turned to his helmsman, giving the order that would define the fate of his species. "Set course," he said. "Back to the homeworld." "Back?" The helmsman hesitated. "But the Concordium will hunt us. The humans will come for us." "Yes," Kelthor said darkly. "They will come. And we must be ready. The nature of the night. Back aboard the Concordium flagship, the leaders of the galaxy had gathered in the Grand Chamber, watching as the night stepped into their midst. The High Speaker sat upon the central dais, her luminous green eyes unreadable as she studied the human warrior. Around her, representatives from over 40 species whispered in hushed voices. They had seen the battle. They had seen what he had done. And they feared him. The High Speaker finally broke the silence. "You are not what we expected," she said carefully. "When we sent for aid, we thought your people would send a fleet." The knight's gaze did not waver. "You did not need a fleet," he replied. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. The Zilnari diplomat, a tall, serpentine creature wrapped in ceremonial silks, leaned forward. "You are an anomaly," the Zilnari said. "A singularity. One warrior against an army. This is not the way of war." The knight's expression remained impassive. "You misunderstand," he said. The High Speaker raised a delicate brow. "Then help us understand." The knight exhaled, his armor shifting like liquid moonlight as he spoke the word. "Night." The chamber fell silent. The Concordium had translated every human word. They had dissected the meaning behind every phrase, every concept. But this word remained beyond them. The knight took a step forward, and the chamber shuddered as if reality itself had bent around him. "A knight is not a soldier," he said. "Not a warrior. Not a protector. Not a conqueror." His eyes burned, and for a moment the Concordium felt the weight of something ancient. "A knight is a promise," he whispered. "A blade that does not rust. A shield that does not break. A force that cannot be bought, nor silenced, nor deterred." The High Speaker's voice was soft. "And now that the Urdrox are defeated?" she asked. "What will a knight do?" The human smiled. "We watch," he said simply. "We wait." And for the first time in the Concordium's long history, they understood fear. In the depths of the void, far away in the blackest reaches of space, something shifted. Something woke. The knight's presence had not gone unnoticed. And from the shadows of the universe, something else was coming. Something that had no translation. The void was never empty. Far beyond the wreckage of the Urdrox fleet, past the distant nebulae where light itself struggled to breathe, something watched. It had no name. No true form. It had existed long before the Concordium, before the Urdrox, before the first primitive creatures had risen from the muck of their homeworlds and dared to dream of the stars. And it had been waiting. Now a night had risen. And the time for waiting was over. The gathering of the Urdrox. The Urdrox homeworld, Garashthal, was a world of storms and iron. Blackened towers stretched into the smog-filled sky, jagged and unyielding. The air trembled with the constant hum of war factories, the distant echoes of battle chants ringing through the endless metal corridors of the Grand Warlord's citadel. Kelthur stood before them now, the last surviving war captain of the Blood-Throne Armada. The warlords loomed above him, their massive exoskeletal forms wrapped in ceremonial war steel. Their eyes glowed in the dim light of the chamber. He had come to speak of the impossible. Of a single human who had ended an entire war. At first they laughed. The warlord of the 10th house, his mandibles clicking in amusement, slammed a fist against his obsidian throne. "A story for the weak. The desperate," he growled. "No human could defeat our war master alone." Kelthur did not flinch. "It happened," he said coldly. "I watched it with my own eyes." The laughter faded. The warlord of the 2nd house, the most ancient among them, tilted her head. Her voice, when it came, was a low rasp, like rust grinding against steel. "This human," she murmured. "What is he?" Kelthur exhaled. "They call him a knight," he said. "And there is no translation." That silenced them. For the first time in 10,000 cycles, the Urdrox felt something unfamiliar. Not rage. Not fury. Something colder. Something like fear. The Concordium's dilemma. Back on the Concordium capital world, the Great Council was in chaos. The knight's victory had changed everything. For centuries, the Concordium had been the supreme power of the galaxy, not because of their military might but because of their ability to mediate, to balance, to control. But now, the very existence of the knight threatened that control. "He is not an army," the High Speaker said, her voice calm but sharp. "He is not bound by treaties, nor diplomacy, nor the weight of politics." The chamber was silent. They all knew what she meant. The Concordium had power because it had rules. But the knight? The knight was a force beyond rules. The conversation that changed the galaxy. The knight stood on the balcony of the Concordium's highest tower, gazing out at the endless cityscape below. When the high speaker approached, he did not turn. "You are afraid," he said softly. She did not deny it. "The Concordium cannot exist in a galaxy where warriors like you roam unchecked," she said. "You are a disruption. A singularity." The knight finally turned to face her. His armor shifted, the golden emblem on his chest flickering like a dying star. "I am neither warlord nor ruler," he said. "I claim no throne. I seek no dominion." The high speaker studied him. "Then what do you seek?" The knight was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke a single word. "Balance." The high speaker frowned. "That is not an answer." The knight smiled. "It is not meant to be." The first sign of the end. In the deepest reaches of the void, where no light had ever touched, something began to move. Something that had been watching. Waiting. Now at last it was time. And the nights would not be enough. The void was never empty. It had been waiting. Watching. The war between the Erdrox and the Concordium had been meaningless to it, insignificant squabbles among lesser beings. But then, something changed. A night had awakened. A force that should not exist had returned. And so, the silence of the void was broken. From the depths of a forgotten sector of space, a ripple spread. A wave of darkness, unseen and unheard, moving between the stars. Something older than war was rising. Something that had no name. The Erdrox's decision. Kelthur stood before the high war council of his people, knowing that everything depended on his next words. The Erdrox had ruled by dominance, by the unshakable belief that they were the strongest force in the galaxy. And now they had seen something stronger. A single warrior had erased their greatest war master. And Kelthur had glimpsed what lay beyond, something even more terrifying. "We cannot win," he said. The gathered warlords bristled, their exoskeletal plates shifting with barely contained fury. One of them, the warlord of the 10th house, snarled. "The Erdrox do not kneel." Kelthur's mandibles clicked in irritation. "Then we will die on our knees," he snapped. "Because this war is already lost. You think the human is the threat? You think the Concordium is our enemy? You do not see what is coming." Silence. The warlord of the 2nd house, ancient and wise, studied him. "What do you propose?" she asked. Kelthur took a slow breath. "We do what has never been done before," he said. "We do what the Erdrox have sworn never to do." He let the words settle. "We stand with the humans." The Concordium's fear. The high speaker had always believed in order. In control. But the moment the Erdrox warlord stepped onto the Concordium's capital world, not as conquerors but as emissaries, she knew that order was dead. She watched as Kelthur approached the grand chamber, his armor dull, his weapons sheathed. He moved with the weight of a species on the brink of extinction. "We surrender," he said simply. The council erupted in chaos. The Erdrox did not surrender. The Erdrox did not yield. And yet here they were. Kelthur's mandibles twitched in irritation. "You think we fear you?" he growled. "We do not. We fear something else." The chamber fell silent. And then the doors opened. And the knight entered. The war that was coming. The knight stepped forward, his liquid metal armor shifting like living starlight. "You have seen it," he said, addressing Kelthur. "You have felt its presence." Kelthur exhaled slowly. "Yes." The high speaker narrowed her eyes. "What are you talking about?" The knight turned his gaze toward her. "There is something moving in the void," he said. "Something that should not exist." The chamber felt colder. "What?" the high speaker asked softly. The knight's voice was quiet. "The enemy that we were made to fight." The origin of knights. For centuries the galaxy had believed humans to be ordinary. A species no different from any other, ambitious, clever, violent. But now the truth was coming to light. The knight was not a soldier. He was not even a warrior. He was something else. And there was a reason why there was no translation for the word, knight. Because knights were never meant to be understood. Only feared. Long ago, in the forgotten history of humanity, there had been a war. A war that no record remembered. A war against something not of this universe. The knights had been created for that war. And now the enemy they had once fought was returning. The beginning of the end. The void rippled. A presence that should not exist awoke. The stars flickered. And across the galaxy, every knight that had ever lived felt it. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. And this time there would be no surrender. The final message. The Concordium, the Erdrox, the entire galaxy, They were all on the brink of annihilation. But the knight did not waver. He had been waiting for this moment. He turned to the High Speaker, to Kelthor, to the leaders of every species. "We fight," he said. And the galaxy followed him into war. That. For now. Fire enjoyed the story? Want more epic sci-fi battles? Rocket. Subscribe to the Void Narratives and never miss a tale of humanity's unstoppable will.